Good morning, everyone, and welcome to some thoughts from the office, which we haven't done for quite a while, and I hope it doesn't bring back too many bad memories of pandemics and lockdowns. But I'm unable to be with you this morning, so here I am from the office. And I'm going to do a last talk on the series I've been doing about the character and attributes of God, and we're going to think about the fact that God is spirit this morning. I know, what was I thinking of when I embarked on this series, I thought to myself. But anyway, here we go. We're going to try some thoughts about that and what it means for us. I'm going to start off with the reading, which is taken from John chapter 4. This is the event where Jesus meets a woman by a well in Samaria and gets into a conversation with her, and during that he says this: "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship that we do know. What we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth." So, if God is spirit, that means that he doesn't have a body. He doesn't have physical attributes in the way that we do. And he's not visible, at least not normally, not unless he makes himself visible in some way. And that, of course, makes life very tricky for us to relate to and to worship and understand what we can't see or feel. Is really very hard for us. We are very physical, sensual, visual people and beings, and you know, we know how to relate to what we can see and feel and touch, and you know, we say out of sight, out of mind, and that's often how it is, and we can't often visualize or conceive of things that are out of sight. They do become out of mind. So it's hard for us to relate to God, a God who is spirit. Now that doesn't mean that God is a force or an energy or a gas or any kind of matter that we can conceive of. And yet he is a person. He's a person, as we've said before, that we can relate to, that can communicate to us, that does communicate and has feelings and thinks, even though God does that all without a body, without a brain or a voice box or eyes. His existence is an entirely different thing to anything we can imagine or see. I have a definition which I'm taking from Wayne Grudem's systematic theology book, and it says this: God's spirituality means that God exists as a being that is not made of any matter, has no parts or dimensions, is unable to be perceived by our bodily senses, and is more excellent than any other kind of existence. That's a really helpful definition, I think. Now, what does that practically mean for us, that God is spirit? I've got 5 things to draw out that we need to bear in mind in relating to God. The first is that if God is spirit, then he's not limited spatially or by time. That's part of the context of John chapter 4, where Jesus is debating with the Samaritan woman as to where God should be worshipped. You know, the Samaritans worshipped him on a mountain in Samaria, and obviously the Orthodox Jews of the time would worship in the temple in Jerusalem. But Jesus says there's a time coming when none of that will matter anymore, because God isn't limited in that way. He's not spatially limited. There's no place that we can ever go to or experience where God is not present, because he is spirit. You know, it's part of the thought that the psalmist had when he says, where can I go to get away from God? If I go to the farthest parts of the earth, he's there. If I go down to the depths, he's there. If I go up to the heights, he's there. And that to me is a great comfort, that there's no realm, there's no location, there's no site where I can go that God is not with me, that is not available to me, his presence is not there. He's always there. We may feel him more in certain places than others, but he is always present. And that reminds me really of some of the grace of Jesus coming as a human being, because he left that part of his nature behind in order to become physically a person. He limited himself for us, and that's a wonderful picture of his grace and his mercy, that he did that and became time limited in that sense, although still fully God, but he became man. But because God is spirit, he's not limited by time and space in the way that we as human beings are. And secondly, the fact that God is spirit means that we need to be reminded that nothing created can ever fully represent him. That's why one of the first commandments was, don't make any images of me, don't worship any images, because an image is always limited. It always misses something of who God is, although they can be helpful in certain ways, images, to help us relate to God, but yet they're always limited. They distort in some way, they're always partial. So we have to be really, really careful, because they can be dangerous. Dangerous to misunderstanding or misrepresentation. So don't think of God solely in terms of any icon or image or representation. Some of those can partly help us, but even the cross leads us to think of him only in his death, and maybe doesn't help us to understand that he was risen as well. So just be aware of that. Also beware that because we are physical and find this concept of relating to a God who is spirit very hard, we're often drawn to worship and relate to created things. This has been going on since the beginning of time, and since the fall, that we want to worship things we can see and touch and sense. Paul says it well in Romans 1. He says, for although mankind knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. And even, the Israelite nation, although they were told don't make any representation, as soon as they get to that point where Moses goes off up the mountain to receive the Ten Commandments and to talk with God, he's gone for a while, and they think, we need some physical representation, so they make the golden calf. And we've been doing that as humanity for centuries since. We all worship something, and it may not be figures of animals, although there are lots of images of God still around that people worship. But it's created things, it's the human mind, the human ingenuity, what we do through science, people or wealth, or it's all the stuff that we desire to own to make us feel as if we are living the life, houses and computers and all the rest of it, or it's fame and fortune and stuff. So ever since the fall, this draw to idolatry has been part of us, and wanting to give attention and praise to created things. So none of us are immune to that. That's the danger. None of us are. It's so easy to lapse into what we can see and feel and touch and experience. It's often experiences these days that we worship and crave for. Sometimes it's even, the church, or it's the Bible, or it's our service. Those things can become our idols, and it's because, again, we experience them, whereas God, who is spirit, very difficult to experience or see, although we sometimes can. So beware of that. It's an innate danger for all of us that we'll worship the creation or something created or some experience of creation rather than the invisible God who is spirit. Fourthly, we need to grow into and learn a new way of relating to God, and that's by the Holy Spirit. We don't have, as it said in Grudem's definition, we don't have the capacity in any of our physical way to relate to God, and yet we are created by him to relate to him as his children. We have that capacity within us, which is dead until we become Christians and give our hearts to him, and he fills us with his spirit, and that brings us spiritually alive. That part of us that is the non-material part of us, our mind and our inner being, that isn't the tangible bit of us, but is nevertheless part of us. We are spiritual beings, albeit within a physical body. So we have to learn to grow into this relationship that we have with him. He says in that passage where he's talking to the woman at the well, to worship God you must worship him in spirit and in truth, because God is spirit. And he uses that same Greek word pneuma to relate to God being spirit and the capacity within us as to relate to him and worship him. And that word pneuma means breath. It's the non-material part of us, and God brings that alive through his spirit. And our minds and our hearts, when we come to Christ, are renewed to perceive him, to interact with him, to sense his promptings, to begin to understand his heart, and to sense when he's talking to us and speaking to us. And that's deep within our hearts and within our spirits. But it's something that he brings alive within us, and that ability to sense his presence and to know his presence with us. Now, when we are beginning or learning to relate to somebody we've never met before, often there's a lot of misunderstandings as we get to know them, as we become closer to them. And for those that we relate to really closely, we know what they're thinking almost before they say anything, and that we develop that sense of relating that is so deep and intuitive, and almost non-material. But on that way, we often make mistakes in understanding. So we misread body language, or we misread how they're thinking, or what they mean by what they say. And it's only over time, as we get to know people, we understand their sense of humour, or the way that all the quirks of their habits and body language and ways of relating, and we get to understand them. And we will make mistakes along that road of learning to relate by the Spirit. Sometimes we will think we've heard from God and we haven't, but the more we work at it and the more we come to him and ask him to help us, then the better we get at it. We really do. And we're all growing in that. Still making mistakes. Very often I make mistakes in the way that I hear or don't hear, or So we can learn to sense his presence, feel his promptings, just sensing that God is telling us to do this or that, and through pictures, visions, words, and all the rest of it, he communicates in lots of different ways, often very fleeting ways that are difficult to get hold of until because we rely on him. So far we've thought about that God isn't limited spatially. That's great that we can relate to him wherever we are. The fact that nothing physically in this physical created realm can fully represent him. The danger of being drawn to worshipping what we can see and feel and touch. and the fact that we have to learn this new way of relating to God. And the last thing that I want to say is, because of that, leading on from that last point, is that it's absolutely essential that we keep being filled with the Holy Spirit. This is a non-negotiable. Nothing works in the life of Christ, the life of relating to Christ, without the Holy Spirit's help. And this was an insistence in the New Testament that we as his believers are filled with the Spirit, and we need to continue and keep being filled with the Spirit. Right at the beginning of the start of the church in Acts, the apostles had to wait until the Holy Spirit came before they could ever go out and do anything. And in Acts there are various stories where the apostles come across people who have not received the Holy Spirit. They've kind of had some understanding of Christ, but not yet been filled with the Spirit, and so they're prayed for. The New Testament apostles, the founding fathers of the church, understood the necessity of being filled with the Spirit, and it's go on being filled with the Spirit. So to receive power, to bring in the kingdom blessings and receive kingdom blessings, we need the Holy Spirit. We need the Holy Spirit for giftings, for serving him. We need the Holy Spirit to do that work of redeeming us, changing our character, bringing us into the image of Christ. That's the Holy Spirit's work, as we do cooperate and interact with him in that, but it's the Holy Spirit work. We need the Holy Spirit to be able to worship, truly worship God, to give our hearts to him, and in that true devotion. It's a work of the Spirit within us. To understand truth, we need the inspiration and insights that the Holy Spirit gives us, and finally, to relate to him in prayer and in so many ways, we need the filling of the Holy Spirit. So that's my final thought for this morning, and just prompting for those of you who maybe are still finding that hard to relate and to welcome the Holy Spirit's presence. I just want you to encourage you to press through. The Holy Spirit's presence is beautiful. It's sometimes challenging, but it's beautiful, it's healing, it's redeeming. I find it the most peaceful and wonderful thing. I can't live without the presence of God. As David said, Lord, whatever you do, don't take your presence, don't take your Spirit from me. And that's what I want to say. So God is Spirit. It's confusing. It's hard. It's hard for us as beings in this physical world. But I want to encourage you that God is able to be related to and known and experienced through the power of the Spirit. So may God bless you on this journey. May God's presence be with you this week. May you know the God who is Spirit in a deeper and more meaningful way, that he is present to you wherever you are, whatever you're doing, wherever you're going. Keep talking to him, keep relating to him, keep asking for more of him, keep asking for the Spirit's presence. God bless you.